Are you looking to get a head start on first quarter? Here at Change Coaches, we prepare people to lead in today's workplace. And we do that, leadership and organizational coaching, everything ranging from one-on-one executive coaching to group coaching related to certain competencies that you love middle managers to learn. We also offer keynotes, and those keynotes are based on the Leading Below the Surface book. And then finally, our most exciting offering that we just recently launched is empathy-based sales training. So we will get your sales team in a room, be able to develop them, train them, bring in more sales, and also bring you in more connections with customers. To learn more, visit changecoaches.io or email info@changecoaches.io. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. I'm your host, LaTonya Wilkins. And a couple things before we start. First off, I want to tell you a little bit about this episode, why I'm recording it. Today will be a solo episode, and it wasn't an episode I was expecting to record. So I'll first get into that. And second, I'll get into the podcast, how you can help spread the word. But number one, today is the episode is all going to be focused on how to build relationships in our current society. Again, how to build relationships in our current society. If you're someone that's looking to find your people, find your community, expand your friendship circle, expand what we call weak ties, we're going to cover all that today. Today's episode is for you. I understand how hard this can be, especially when you're no longer in college, or maybe you're in midlife, or maybe you're even in your 30s and 40s. I also am recording this episode because I recently read this article, the cover article in the Atlantic called The Antisocial Century. And gosh, was it interesting. I have all these books behind me that I need to read that are on my list, but this, gosh, just caught my eye. So I spent the whole night reading that article. I read it twice. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about other things I've read around this topic, including the anxious generation. And then what I would like to do is land with how can we create better relationships so we contribute to our society? I think we could all be doing better. And another reason why I was motivated about this topic is I'm recording this on January 21st of 2025. We just had a major election in the U.S., presidential election. And so we're anticipating a lot of change in the U.S. and globally. And so I'd love to talk about how this topic and things that have happened around this topic have contributed to the change. So I'm going to cover that today as well. So, second thing, please, if you're listening to this and you like it, please share it with anyone else that can benefit. If you're watching this on YouTube, please follow, please share. We just launched this on YouTube not too long ago. And so we're really trying to spread the word. So if you could help us do that, thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners. And if there's anything that you catch out of this that you'd like to talk about, please email me at info@changecoaches.io, and I try to respond to everyone. But let's first talk about this social isolation. So this topic of social isolation. So first things first, there's a few things that I've really noted about this topic that have come up recently. Number one, the Surgeon General, they talked about loneliness being an epidemic. So they said it was worse than smoking. So being lonely is worse than smoking. Number two, I read the book, The Anxious Generation, recently. And that was all about Gen Z just being antisocial, being on social media quite a bit, not really talking to each other. And number three, it's interesting because that sentiment has also been repeated with therapists. Like I know therapists, and we've talked about their client bases, and there are therapists that's all they do is coach Gen Z to be able to have social skills. And Gen Zers, if you're listening, I'm not trying to insult you. I'm just talking a little bit about how this works and what's going on in the research. You know, what's really interesting is last year, I was at a neighborhood coffee shop, and they were having an event called Speed Friending. And so if that tells you a little bit about the state of the world, what it tells us is that people are lonely, people are seeking connection. I also recently read a book called Let Them, Mel Robbins. Some of you may know this book. Actually, I really like the book. I'm not, I know there's something going on with this being a poem and maybe the right should have been shared. I don't know as much about that, but I did want to acknowledge that because I am all about, being able, like citing other people's work, making sure that you're doing that. But that book was really great because it talked about, friendships and how to make friendships. And a lot of the things that she talked about, I agree with. And some of it I'll talk about today, but, it was all about like accepting the world as it is and talking about how to make friends and letting people be who they are while you go through that process. So a couple things. Let's start with some of the facts that really stunned me as I was reading through the Atlantic article and other research. So number one, our social interactions have dipped at least 30%. I think it was like 30% was, it was more than 30% for Gen Zs, but when you look across the board, it's about 30%. So people are having fewer relationships outside of work. People are going, remember in like 10 years ago, we went to dinner with people. We had a drink with people. We might go to happy hour. And it doesn't have to be alcohol. It could be coffee or whatever. But we're doing that less. And we're doing that about 30% less on average across humans. And I think this was in US based research. Number two, this was something that I also heard from my friends at the IOC conference. That's the first time I heard about this research. But people, there was a study that was done and people were asked if they wanted to interact with someone on their commute and how that would make them feel. And people basically said that they didn't want to interact with people on their commute, that they didn't think it would make them feel good. But what was interesting is when they did it, it was very favorable. Like they ended up talking to the person. They ended up connecting with the person. And so we kind of have this confirmation bias kind of thing where that could be running rampant, where we're meeting with people and we're thinking, oh my gosh, social situations are such a pain. And we might be carrying that around so much that maybe there's good connections to be had all the time, or are having good connections, but we still say it's bad because based on the data that we have. So we might, again, it might be distorted. We might be biased around this, but the research says we actually enjoyed these connections. So that's number two. Number three, this is something that was in the article, but like, I want to kind of take this from a different place. And as a coach, I want to kind of give everybody a visualization. So maybe visualize the last time you went to your favorite restaurant and it's a restaurant that doesn't have a ton of seating, maybe has a little bit of seating, but a lot of takeout. So that's kind of what the author was visualizing. Like, think about that. Like, how has that changed? So I think about one of my favorite neighborhood Mexican restaurants here in Chicago down the street from me. And what's interesting is they used to have a very small indoor seating space. And I loved it because I would talk to the cooks and the people. They would make homemade pozole and it was really nice. And we talk about the recipes, but then they closed that and they never reopened it after COVID. And now, I mean, they're thriving, but everything is takeout. So there's not that third place for me anymore. Like I still go there, but I pick it up and I take it out. So some of you could probably relate to that our interactions have really fallen a lot. And what's interesting is that, the study calls I think it calls it the middle ring. And so there's an inner ring that's everybody close to us and then the outer ring, right? But there's this middle ring and those are the loose ties, right? These are the loose ties that I don't know if any of you have heard of that article, The Strength of Loose Ties. I'll leave it in the comments, but, it talks about how loose ties are more, valuable in life than close ties, right? Because your friend might know a friend that might know a friend that, for a hobby or a job or whatever. So those loose ties are important. So we're losing those loose ties, which is kind of scary. And again, it's not a good benefit for us. So we're losing those loose ties. And then the second thing that, we're losing is, with that middle ring is we're not able to practice social skills. Okay. So take a minute and think about let me go back to 10 years. And I'm not a great example of this because I'm a coach. I'm out all the time doing things. I have an office that I, willingly got outside of my house and I like having that office. But let me go back to the Mexican restaurant. Like if that was like a third place that I really like I would have conversations with them about the community and things. And like, I might not agree with them about the community or whatever, but that's an opportunity to practice socializing, right? Or, neighbors, like block parties, like talking to your neighbors is an opportunity to talk about, to practice social skills and like to disagree and agree. I mean, I remember when I was a kid growing up in Iowa and like my dad worked, in manufacturing and his friends, he would talk to his friends. They would disagree about certain things, but they were fine, right? Because they were in touch with each other every day and they respected each other, and that was practice for them. But we're losing that. We're losing this practice. Even like when I was a kid, I think I've talked about this on podcasts before. I had this community of elders that weren't blood family, but they took care of me. Like they helped pitch in, and that's happening less. So all these things are happening less. We're working from home more. And yeah, it's great. I'm at home in my home office. But that has downsides to it, right? And we've learned that hybrid is probably the best way to work for, collaboration, innovation. I know people get really passionate about this, but I'm just calling out the research. But it's, when I look at some of this and I talk to some people, they even tell me, like, people that, like, young adults are like, I just don't feel comfortable talking to people. I just don't feel comfortable. Like I went to 2 parties last weekend and it was really interesting. And one was very young. It's people in their 20s, and just the way people socialize and the discomfort that you could feel in the air and people just not lingering as long. All of these things are happening. So what does this mean? And what does this have to do with leading below the surface? Why am I talking about it? Well, because all of this influences, maybe a couple other things, like all of this. Well, we've talked about this. All of this influences how we vote, how we interact, how we think. And we are humans. We're social creatures. So it also influences our mental health. I was looking at the article and reviewing that, and I saw that, a lot of people, like there was, trends on TikTok that said that, basically it was a trend, it was basically a meme that was like, oh, people canceled. I'm going to stay home. And so it's like, and people are excited about that. If it happens once in a while, great, but it keeps happening. So people are spending more time in solitude. And I just spent the whole last weekend mostly in solitude. I needed it because I was traveling a lot before that and I had a lot going on, but it's becoming a thing. And there's like AI that's becoming people's friends, but humans are social creatures. It also contributes, again, to our society. And again, think about when maybe like 10 years ago, like you had more relationships. Like if you have children, they were probably out more doing things, and it just shapes us into more well-rounded human beings, emotional intelligence. We have more of that when we're with people and when we can learn it. So what does it have to do with us? Well, because I think if you're listening to this podcast, we all want to be better members of society. We all want to connect better across differences. We all want to build our connections across differences, all that kind of stuff. And also, it's a human need. Like we need to interact with people. And some of you may also be listening to this because you're like, LaTonya, this is all great and all, but I don't feel comfortable, or I've been looking, but I haven't found my people. Okay, so let's talk about that. So I'm going to talk about, for the next 5 minutes or so, how we can find these communities. Like if you're listening for that, and then we'll end with next steps. And again, how to land this and be a better member of society overall, maybe even how to talk about this to your organization and the problem of it and the problems with well-being that it causes. So first off, like if you're someone that's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I don't want to say crazy. Oh my gosh, this is wild. Like, what do I need to do because I've been looking for my people, and LaTonya, everything you're saying is resonating with me. So if you're like, let me give you these 3 steps to be able to connect better and define new connections. Number 1 is just go to new places, like in your neighborhood, that maybe you don't even feel like going out, but just go, make eye contact, put your phone down. What's really interesting is one of my childhood friends and I've been talking about loneliness a lot. And she's a parent, and she was telling me how she was able to, because she's feeling this loneliness, and she was able to strike up a conversation with other parents at one of her kids at like sporting events. Like she had been to like a lot of these, but one day everything shifted because she put her phone down and she was able to make eye contact. I call this P2P listening and leading below the surface, but just be able to listen. Like the P2B listening is environmental listening, and see if you can make eye contact with people. Maybe smile at people. And I say that in a non-creepy way. So my example is, there's, I live in Chicago. There's a coffee shop that I go to, quite a bit. Like sometimes I'll go, and work like on a Saturday or something. Like if I need to get some things done. And the last time I went, I made it an intention to talk to people. And I had like 3 people talk to me. And the way that I did that is I was getting work done, but I also wanted to have this parallel goal of being social. And so I ended up having a really great conversation with someone. We exchanged numbers. Someone else approached me. And then I ended up talking to someone about a book they were reading. They were reading Malcolm X. So we ended up having really good conversation about that. If I was just on my computer, I would not have noticed that person. So that's number 1. Go places, make eye contact, smile. Number 2 is to start a friend or social diary. And the reason why I tell people to do this is because everything won't work. So the thing I just told you, the coffee shop, that worked that day. But if it didn't work, then what's next? And a diary is so important. So if that doesn't work, maybe have another activity. Maybe you do 2 activities a week, or you try 2 things a week. But try different things. Start this diary. Maybe have time-bound goals, intentions. Maybe it's just weekly intentions. Like this week, I want to start a new conversation with a new person. And it's someone outside of your family, right? Outside of your family unit, however you define that. So again, having this diary, these intentions. And number 3 is, this is what's the hardest one for me, but I think it's been the most beneficial, is let your friendship and your social circle naturally shed and grow its feathers back. So naturally shed, grow its feathers, fur back. However, to make that metaphor work. So to make that metaphor work, let's think about a dog. Like dogs shed, they grow their hair back, their hair gets thicker, right? So as we go through this, think about like maybe if there's friends in your life that just need to drop off, like, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody gets really busy. Maybe they, some people have children, their children are at different places in life. And so you might take hiatuses. Like when the childhood friend I was just talking about, we had a close friendship, high school, college, and then kind of dropped up, like maybe after college, then dropped off, and now it's back. And so it's like, let things go through seasons, and like, you might naturally shed, but then grow that back. Right. And so, but just, if people fall off, let them. Like, and that goes back to the book that I was talking about, but I love that concept. Just let them fall off, and then let them come back later, right? It's like, we don't need to take offense to this. It's like people's lives change. But it's like, what you want to do is just naturally go through the cycle of change. And like, as you're shedding, you're gaining. You're shedding, you're gaining. Your coat's getting thicker, right? It's getting like, it's a better quality coat. And so thinking about that, like, as you shed, like, if you let something shed, you're opening up the way to something else new. And so letting things shed and building that. So I want to end with the last piece that I had talked about. And that's, how do we talk about this? Like, what's the so what? Well, like, yeah, we talked about we focused on a lot of the personal benefits of this, but let's talk about organizationally. Think about how much better of a leader you'll be and a colleague you'll be if you can organically connect with different types of people. Think about your well-being. That's going to create oxytocin. That's going to create bonds. Just think about our society as a whole. This isolation, for example, causes us to vote a certain way or to believe certain things that may not be true, or to just not have empathy, like have in groups, strengthen in groups and out groups and that effect. So really thinking about this and how this fits into your life. And so, that's pretty much all I have today. So next episode, I'll focus on, the state of DEI part 2. So if you catch us every episode, you might want to go back to the first episode. I'll actually put the link in the comments so you can review that. And, thanks everyone. And we'll see you next time.